Order of business to take up on third reading Senate Bill 16.
For what purpose? We're on suspension of the rules? Okay. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bedford, Birdwell.
18 ayes, 12 nays. The rules are suspended. Now the chair lays out on third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 16. The secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 16, relating the purpose of public institutions of higher education and a prohibition on compelling students enrolled at those institutions to adopt certain beliefs.
Members, there's an amendment. Secretary, read the amendment.
Third reading amendment, floor amendment number 1 by West.
Senator West.
Testing? Okay. Mr. President, members, this is an agreed amendment between the author of the bill and myself. This amendment will amend the amendment that was placed on the bill. Frankly, what it does, it says the coordinating board by rule shall develop a procedure for the institutions of higher education to implement this particular bill. It also puts in place that some of the requirements that need to be taken into consideration in implementation of the bill and providing procedures for implementation of the bill. And then it binds the institutions to implement it. And each institution shall implement the procedures, and then not later than January 1st of each year, there should be a report back to the legislature.
Senator Hughes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Senator West for the amendment we discussed yesterday and worked together on this. It is acceptable to the author.
Any objection? Hearing none. Amendment is adopted. Senator Hughes. Oh, that was the amendment to the amendment. No, that was its own amendment.
Mr. President.
Yes, Senator.
I believe we adopted an amendment yesterday. That's now part of the bill. So this is an amendment to the bill as it appears on third reading. Is that right?
Correct. It's not an amendment to the amendment. You had me confused there for a second. Senator Gutierrez, what purpose?
Just to speak on the bill, when appropriate.
You recognize this at the time. We're on third reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we talked a lot about this yesterday, and I wasn't compelled to speak today, but I am a little bit caught unawares, a little bit confused. And I'm confused because yesterday we heard from the bill's author about the bill is that a professor may not compel or attempt to compel to adopt a student enrolled at an institution to adopt a belief that any race, sex, or ethnicity, political or religious belief is inherently superior to any race. We went down a series of fact patterns with the bill's author, and he said, no, that wouldn't be violative of the bill. And then we got to the point about CRT. And I said, are you saying that we cannot teach critical race theory? And the short answer is that he first said that, no, you can teach critical race theory as long as you don't compel or attempt to compel a student enrolled at the institution to adopt. And then, after a few other questions, then he said that you can't teach critical race theory in our universities. So I'm confused. He went on to say that that it was not okay to teach critical race theory on our universities based on his perception of what critical race theory is. And I think that that's important, because his perception of what critical race theory is absolutely wrong. There is nothing in the course material of critical race theory that says that any one race or ethnicity is superior to another. It is the critical thinking about race, asking students to think critically about race as a construct to our socioeconomic, political establishments. And it is teachers teaching that concept, not indoctrinating, not asking, and certainly not compelling anybody to take one position or another. So I'm confused as to what we can and can't do in our universities, because apparently Senator Hughes is suggesting to us, because I think he was confused. First he said it was okay, then he said it wasn't okay. And then, not by way of argument, but we find a tweet that he says, during the debate, we're banning critical race theory. And so I'm confused. You know, Vince Lombardi, he said something once. He said, you got to strive for perfection in this world. He's telling his football players. He says, you're never going to be perfect, but in your striving for perfection, you will achieve excellence. This bill is far from perfection. It is far from excellence. And it is far from what we want from our professors in our universities, and it is far from what we want from our students. Because it is those universities' jobs and those professors' jobs to promote students about racial relations, about Black Lives Matter, about the things that affect them in their lives, and a study going back in history as to why things happen. Why are more blacks incarcerated than white people? There's a socioeconomic reasoning for that. And it's okay for us to have that discussion and that debate. It's okay. No one's gonna get hurt, Senator Hughes, if we have that discussion and the debate. So I'm confused. I'm confused as to what you want to do here. There's a grandeur to Texas. We always like to say it. We always like to say that we live in this great state and we do great things in this state. I respectfully submit to you that this bill is far from great. It is far from great. It is small because it seeks to undermine the principal objective of university professors and our universities themselves, which is to provoke young minds to think about being their best selves so that they can someday come and be legislators and be great and think great things, not small things. And this bill, Senator, I'm sorry, is absolutely not about freedom of speech. And yes, you are curtailing freedom of speech in this bill. And so I'm going to keep my comments at this. This bill is small, and we're so much better than this.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Eckhart, for what purpose?
Speak on the bill.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is censorship masquerading as academic freedom. This is censorship masquerading as academic freedom, which is exactly the opposite of what we strive for in our institutions of higher education. The stated intention of the author is to support the marketplace of ideas that is our higher institution, where we go to explore the various arguments and then adopt those arguments that are most compelling to us as students. We rely on teachers, professors, to bring us those compelling arguments based on academic exploration and the evidence that that academic exploration provides these students in medicine, biology, history, and so much more. We spent so much of the morning lauding the amazing teachers up in the gallery that had retired, celebrating their ability to provoke young minds to explore their universe and weigh the comparative benefits and the evidence of what they were being taught so that they could form their own beliefs. But this bill is censorship masquerading as academic freedom. I know every single one of us in this room, and many of us told the story this morning of how a teacher expanded their minds. Two of my best teachers were teachers I completely disagreed with. They were compelling teachers. Some would even suggest they were bullying teachers. Some of y'all went to law school at UT and had Lino Graglia as a professor. I couldn't stand Lino Graglia, but he was an amazing law professor. He was considered the most provocative law professor in the United States at the time. And he advocated in favor of the Hopwood decision and an end to affirmative action. I did not agree with him, but I am a better person for having been taught by him. I also had an undergraduate professor in David Mamet, who is one of the founding members of the University of Austin. Do I agree with David's perspective on the world? Absolutely not. But he was one of the best professors I ever had. I don't think you could find two professors more compelling than Lino Graglia and David Mamet in two completely different disciplines. I am glad I had them as professors, and I would not have wanted to curtail their compelling arguments for their worldview, which I did not adopt for my own. With this bill and the diversity, equity, and inclusion bill we're going to hear, we are dumbing down our higher institutions of learning. We will not be attracting the best professors. We will not be retaining the best students. Students will go out of state for higher education so they can fully explore all that the marketplace of ideas has to offer them, because they know that with this bill and the DEI bill, we will be assuring that our Texas institutions of higher education are nothing but echo chambers, incapable of welcoming the full marketplace of ideas, afraid of the full marketplace of ideas, and uninterested in challenging our worldview with a larger one. And for that reason, I'm voting against this censorship.
Senator Menendez, you're recognized to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I've reached out to leadership of several universities. I've asked, is this a problem that you need our help with? Here's a response that I received from one. Our students have many ways to object to the way a course is taught. Examples mostly about grades, class cancellation, returning homework. We get very few around dogma. We have one currently about liberal politics and discrimination against conservative values. Complaints can go to the department chair, the dean, provost, and even the president. We have an ombudsman. We have an anonymous hotline. We have a Title IX office. We have a dean of students office. It is a healthy system, and there is no indoctrination going on. Members, institutions of higher education are the front lines of research and innovation. Specifically, social sciences and humanities are tasked with exploring complex socio-political, sometimes religious dynamics that transcends the boundaries of hard data. And that's why they're called soft sciences. I take issue with this bill, and I must say there is an inherent conflict, especially between Section 1 and Section 2 of this bill. Section 1 affirms intellectual and academic freedom and diversity so that our students are equipped for the betterment of society. Sounds good. But Section 2 prohibits the vague notion to compel a student to believe in the superiority of one group over another. We equip our students when we teach them critical thinking skills, defined as the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. This requires that every student be able to discern evidence, facts, primary documents, the social-cultural context of the issue, and more. It has been mentioned multiple times in testimony and by our colleagues here on this floor that vague and conflicting legislation like this creates a chilling effect on our professors who are just trying to do their job. Hey, in every profession, there are extremists. We've heard of a couple at UT Law. But the vast majority of professors are just trying to do their job. And this bill will scare many into avoiding topics, especially if they feel that they have some sensitive students in their class, and that will rob the other students of a potential engaging discussion. If we can't discuss periods of oppression, power corruption, and imbalance in the nuanced ways that history affects us today, we are not equipping our students with anything. For example, historically black colleges and universities were here 2 weeks ago advocating in the Capitol to talk about their unique history in the state. And I'm not sure if most of you know, but they were founded during Reconstruction. And the only way they could be created was as if all the fundraising was privately raised, most of it from freed slaves, because of the pervasive racism of the time. So, did you know that because of their unique origins, many HBCUs are still private to this day? Which means that they don't receive any necessary funding for their facilities or financial aid for their students. So like it or not, this is a consequence of the systemic racism from Reconstruction. And so far, we're yet to find a complete solution. In a larger context, if early academics had not had the freedom to facilitate conversations and possibly compel others to believe the harms of slavery or to have empathy for immigrants, we would not have the progress that we have today. Bills like this bill and the DEI bill limit our ability to talk about finding solutions for systemic inequities out of the fear that someone's going to be made uncomfortable. This makes no sense to me. We've talked about Texas being a great state. Why? Because we're hardy, we're resilient, we're diverse, we're mavericks. We're not people that shy away from a fight, a discussion. And we're part of a nation with a deep and complex history that is still being understood. And what does this bill offer for a potentially hateful student in a gender studies who decides to do his presentation on why women don't deserve to vote? Or as I've heard in the last 2 days, professional women tell me that when they were in law school, a professor told them, "You're taking the place of a man." Or when they were in pharmacy school, one of 5 women in a class of 85, "You're taking the place of a man that needs to make money for his family." So aside from it being objectively misogynistic position, let's say he does not argue his point well, and the professor grades his paper harshly. So this hateful student can not only create an unsafe learning environment for the fellow women in his class, but now, if this bill becomes law, this bill will protect the hateful student more than the rest of his classmates. My last point is to codify a belief is extremely subjective in this bill. We're really lucky this bill doesn't apply to this body, to the legislature, because many of us have been compelled to believe that the comforts of some supersede the rights of others. To close, this bill does not help us in a position of being the R1 powerhouse we want to be. And I'm positive that there are already complaint processes established in a case when a student feels they have been mistreated, treated unfairly, or disrespected. I read it to you at the beginning. All these mechanisms have been established to protect both students and professors to ensure a safe learning environment and a space where the dialogue can thrive. Members, we are without a doubt in a polarizing time. But when I speak with students and professors from colleges, they're not complaining about being uncomfortable with conversations in class. They are complaining about growing food insecurity or the fact that more students are graduating from high school without basic writing and math skills for college, or that they just spent 2 years at a community college only to have to retake the classes at their 4-year institution. These are the real issues that they are dealing with. So I will be voting against this bill because I stand by and hope for that Texas has a higher education system that will not limit free speech and that will engage students of all kinds, of all walks of life in every discussion, as uncomfortable as it may be, because that's what will make Texas greater. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes, you're welcome. One final.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. A very short and simple bill. In relevant part, a public institution of higher education must be committed to creating an environment of intellectual inquiry and academic freedom so that all students are equipped for participation in the workforce and the betterment of society, and intellectual diversity so that all students are respected and educated regardless of race, sex, or ethnicity, or social, political, or religious background or belief. What we've experienced in this debate, unable to find anything objectionable in those terms, opponents instead resort to attacking matters that are not in the bill. Simply stated, the bill says what I just read. It then goes on to say that a faculty member may not compel or attempt to compel a student to adopt a belief that any race, sex, ethnicity is inherently superior to any other. And as we discussed extensively, there are situations where we each certainly seem to agree that compelling would be inappropriate. A professor using that authority, using that power, whether of the grade or of the lecture and the force that they have in the classroom. When we talked about what was actually in the bill, there wasn't a whole lot of disagreement. Our disagreement comes when we talk about things that are not in the bill. And how ironic, let me say respectfully to my colleagues, how ironic when members stand here and say things are in the bill that are not in the bill, and then ask rhetorically, why do people think these things are in the bill? Could it be because they heard it here on this floor? If we stick to what's in the bill, it's crystal clear. Let's talk about critical race theory. Are those words in the bill? No, those concepts are in the bill. Why the concepts? Because as we learned over the last 2 days, these definitions change. How many of us remember 2 years ago when we were addressing critical race theory in K through 12? First we heard there's no such thing as critical race theory. Then we heard, well, it's only in law schools. Then we hear more recently, well, it's in higher ed too. And now we hear, well, maybe it's in K through 12, but it's not what you think it is. Do you see the moving target? Do you see how the arguments change when the truth is exposed? Critical race theory is the divisive teaching that racism is inherent and embedded in our legal system, our institutions, our free enterprise system. It's not an American idea, because we know, everyone in this room knows, that America has had difficult, dark things in her past. We still have difficult, hard things to overcome. We're not perfect. We have a long way to go. Do we teach about those difficult things in our past? Yes, of course we do. As we discussed last session in Senate Bill 3, we not only allow the teaching about those things, we require the teaching about those things. About slavery, about the Civil War, about the Jim Crow era, about the Civil Rights Movement, going further back into history, about the Holocaust. And also, we talk about the response to those things, how we've come together as Americans. We talk about the leadership of people like Dr. King, and as you'll recall, contrary to what may have been reported in some national media outlets, Dr. King is mentioned in our curriculum just as many times as George Washington, as he should be. We are for teaching the whole truth about our history, and I think everybody here knows that. But because of some things said, let's make sure the record is clear. We are for teaching the whole truth, the difficult things, the dark things, and how we get past them by coming together as Americans, not dividing ourselves based on race. And we know what's been happening in higher education. More and more, there was testimony on this floor from members who've experienced this with students and even as a student himself, where we've seen the hostility and the environment that's created where higher education, rather than being the open environment of ideas and challenging perspectives, instead a monolithic left-wing echo chamber where one side of the argument is drowned out. And everybody knows this is happening. There's no debate about that. The question is, should there be a response? Now, there was an interesting article yesterday in the Texas Tribune. Some of you may have seen it. It was talking about our debate yesterday. It quotes Professor Karma Chavez, and I'm going to read from the article. It's quoting her. Chavez, who is also a member of the Texas Conference of the American Association of University Professors, said she will often listen to classroom discussions where one student will offer an opinion and others will challenge it based on research or scholarship from the course curriculum. That's good, she said. I want people to be making arguments. She adds that she tells students that all viewpoints are welcome as long as they are engaging with the material and verified research. Quoting her again, but you cannot just make arguments based on an unfounded opinion. I do think that one of the challenges is when you're talking about studies of race and sex and gender, sexuality, the scholarship that exists across the humanities and social sciences, by and large, does not support a conservative viewpoint. She goes on. Not because it's based on a liberal or politicized opinion, but that's what the principal archival or social scientific research has shown about a given topic. But it's not political, it's research, end quote. Professor Chavez says that excluding conservative viewpoints isn't political, it's just research. As she limits her comments to race, sex, gender, sexuality, but I suppose in that area that millennia of what humans have understood about these areas, that doesn't meet her threshold to be worthy of classroom discussion. And I don't think her perspective is limited to those arguments. What about extending that to economics, where there is a perpetual return to socialist ideas that would empower government to care for their people, and in the name of caring for their people, take their liberties away. This didn't work too well in the Soviet Union or a host of other countries who cloak tyranny in the name of many fine-sounding government programs. But all of that history does not qualify as research for many professors. We have to ask ourselves, who is closing their eyes here? Who doesn't want to know the truth? It's always been a belief in truth that tolerates the acceptance of other opinions. That's what higher ed used to be about. Those who believe there is no truth, they don't want to know about it. And in this relevant age, the struggle is primarily between those who hold to some notion of truth that's discoverable and those who believe that all or most things are relative, that my truth is different from your truth. Thankfully, our founders knew better. They accepted the notion that there were enduring features to human nature and that should inform the structure of our government. They believed that human nature was fallen, prone to error and arrogance, and because of that, they fashioned a government of checks and balances where power was divided and shared, where the people would have many entry points to express their opinion of the government and free speech to share that opinion with fellow citizens. Nowhere should that be more true than in the higher education setting. The belief that there's enduring truth to be discovered is what has made our university system the envy of the world. And when we see our universities closing themselves off to half of the political spectrum, ruling out conservative ideas and cloaking that censorship in the name of research, we can know that our universities are departing from what should be their fundamental mission. I bet everybody here knows what's engraved on the tower at the University of Texas, just a few blocks away from here. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. I bet we know who said that. Some may not. Of course, that was Jesus Christ. Would we engrave that if we were building the tower today? I would say no. And that illustrates the problem we are trying to address, at least in part, with this bill. Mr. President, I move final passage, Senate Bill 16.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart.
18 ayes and 12 nays. The bill is finally passed. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Senator West, what purpose?
Mr. President, I know there's been extended debate on this particular bill, and I know how hard it is to reduce it to writing, but I need to figure out how we get this reduced to writing because I anticipate litigation on this. And so we need to make certain that it's reduced to writing, but done in a manner where it's not overburdened on the Secretary's staff. So I'd make a motion to reduce this to writing.
You want to come up for a second? See if we can figure this out. Senator West.
Mr. President, after further reflection, I recognize that any member can request a copy of the transcript of the proceedings associated with SB 16 or any substitute thereof. So I'll withdraw my request at this time.
Thank you. Senator Hughes, what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a motion, a much smaller version of Senator West that, of course, he's handled perfectly. With regard to the remarks made for and against the bill on third reading, I would move those remarks only in my motion be reduced to writing and placed in the journal.
Okay, all the senators who spoke on third reading today?
Yes, sir.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none? Motion is adopted.